A very good afternoon, everyone. It fills my heart with immense pleasure and great delight to welcome you all to this session of TES Reading Club. Today, we are here to read out a novel of all times, a classical work by an amazing writer. Yes, we are indeed reading Jane Eyre. So, if you are someone who's planning to read out, it will be a good start. For those who have already read, it will be an amazing rereading. And for all our dear friends who are preparing for various exams, it will be an amazing session covering many major excerpts from the text. We also have some questions for you all. You may answer them in the chat section below if you know. In case you don't, no worries. Stay along with us and listen to us. I'm sure you'll be able to answer all at the end. And we also have a very exciting announcement to make for all the book lovers and literature enthusiasts. As you know, the World Book Day and birthday of our legend William Shakespeare falls in next week. TES Reading Club is organizing a readathon on 24th April at 2 p.m. We are planning to read out various seminal works by major authors from all ages. So, would you like to join us? You can choose poems, short stories, essays, or excerpts of classical works. Do let us know if you are interested. We are looking forward for your enthusiastic participation. Without any further delay, over to Sharmila to introduce the author.
Introduction to the author. Charlotte Bronte, born on 21st of April 1816 and died on 31st March 1855, was an English novelist and poet, the eldest of the three Bronte sisters who survived into adulthood and whose novels became classics of English literature. She enlisted in school at Roe Head in January 1831, aged 14 years. She left the year after to teach her sisters, Emily and Anne, at home, returning in 1835 as a governess. In 1839, she undertook the role of governess for the Sidgwick family, but left after a few months to return to Haworth, where the sisters opened a school but failed to attract pupils. Instead, they turned to writing, and they each first published in 1846 under the pseudonyms of Currer, Ellis, and Acton Bell. Although her first novel, The Professor, was rejected by publishers, her second novel, Jane Eyre, was published in 1847. The sisters admitted to their Bell pseudonyms in 1848 and by the following year were celebrated in London literary circles.
Introduction of the work. As we all know, Jane Eyre, a very famous work by an English writer, Charlotte Bronte. It is an autobiography and published in 1847 under the pen name Currer Bell. This novel is set in northern England, early 19th century. Jane Eyre is a Bildungsroman which follows the experiences of its eponymous heroine, including her growth to adulthood and her love for Mr. Rochester, the brooding master of Thornfield Hall. This novel is focused on protagonist moral and spiritual development through an intimate first-person narrative. It is a story of a girl's quest for equality and happiness. The novel approaches the topics of class, sexuality, religion, and feminism. A common theme that recurs throughout the novel is the importance of independence.
Characters.
Yes, please. Anjali?
Characters introduction of Jane Eyre. First character, Jane Eyre, the protagonist and narrator of the novel. Jane is an intelligent, honest, plain-featured young girl forced to contend with oppression, inequality, and hardship. Although she meets With a series of individuals who threaten her autonomy, Jane repeatedly succeeds at asserting herself and maintains her principles of justice, human dignity, and morality. She also values intellectual and emotional fulfillment. Her strong belief in gender and social inequality challenges the Victorian prejudices against women and the poor. Second character, Edward Rochester. He is Jane's employer in the novel and the master of Thornfield. Rochester is a wealthy, passionate man with a dark secret that provides much of the novel's suspense. His problems are partly the result of his own recklessness, but he is a sympathetic figure because he has suffered for so long as a result of his early marriage to Bertha. Third character, Bertha Mason, Rochester's secret wife. She is a formally beautiful and wealthy and insane woman. She lives in locked room at third floor of Thornfield and is guarded by Grace Poole. Bertha eventually burns down Thornfield and pulling herself in flames and died at the end of the novel. Next character, Richard Mason, who is the brother of Bertha. During a visit to Thornfield, he is injured by his mad sister. After learning of Rochester's intent to marry to Jane, Richard Manson came there and spoiled the marriage. Next character, Blanche Ingram. Blanche Ingram is a beautiful socialite who despises Jane and hopes to marry Rochester for his money. Helen Burns. Helen Burns is Jane's close friend at the Lowood school. She endures her miserable life there with a passive dignity that Jane cannot understand. Helen dies of consumption in Jane's arms. Maria Temple. Maria Temple is a kind teacher at Lowood who treats Jane and Helen with respect and compassion. Along with Basili, she serves as one of Jane's first positive female role models. Miss Temple helps to clear Jane and Mrs. Reed's associations against her. John Rivers, next character of this novel, along with his sisters Mary and Diana, he serves as Jane's benefactor after she runs away from Thornfield, giving her food and shelter. The minister at Morton. He is cold, reserved, and often controlling in his interaction with others because he is entirely alienated from his feelings and devoted solely to an austere ambition. He serves as a foil to Edward Rochester. Grace Poole. Grace Poole is Bertha Mason's keeper at Thornfield, whose drunken carelessness tranquility allows Bertha to escape. When Jane first arrives at Thornfield, Mrs. Fairfax attributes to Grace all evidence of Bertha's mistrust. Alice Fairfax, the last character from this novel. Alice Fairfax is the housekeeper at Thornfield Hall. She is the first to tell Jane that the mysterious laughter after heard echoing through the halls is in fact the laughter of Grace Poole, a lie that Rochester himself often repeats. These are some important characters from this novel, Jane Eyre. Now let's move on to the questions. Over to you, Princey.
So here are a few questions from the novel Jane Eyre. So in which year was the novel Jane Eyre published? Second question, which was the first work of Charlotte Bronte? Third question for you, what is the color of the room Jane is locked in at Gateshead? Question number 4, whose ghost does Jane believe she sees while at Gateshead? Question number 5, which student befriends Jane at Lowood School? Question number 6, what is Jane's position at Thornfield? Question number 7, what is the real reason for Grace Poole's employment? Question number 8, to whom does Mr. Rochester constantly attribute the demonic laughter from the third story? Question number 9, what item of Jane's clothing does Bertha Mason rip one night? Question number 10, what two natural elements are important symbols in the novel Jane Eyre? Question number 11, what might Bertha Mason's imprisonment symbolize in Victorian England? Question number 12, the lines, "Reader, I married him," are from which chapter of Jane Eyre? Question number 13, which novel is the prequel of Jane Eyre? Question number 14 is, who is the protagonist of the novel The Mad Woman in the Attic, which represent demonic character in the novel of Charlotte Bronte entitled Jane Eyre? Question number 15, who said, "I am not an angel, I will not be until I die, I will be myself," in the novel Jane Eyre? So these are the questions that please comment the answers in the comment box. And now let's move to the excerpts.
It is a cold, wet November afternoon when the novel opens at Gateshead, the home of Jane Eyre's relatives, the Reeds. Jane and the Reed children, Eliza, John, and Georgiana, sit in the drawing room. Jane's aunt is angry with her, purposely excluding her from the rest of the family. So Jane sits alone in a window seat reading book. As she quietly reads, her cousin John torments her. Even John throws a book at Jane and she calls him a murderer and slave driver. The two children fight and Jane is blamed for the quarrel. As punishment, she is banished to the Red Room. In the Red Room, Jane got so scared that she faints. The Red Room was a square chamber very seldom slept in. I might say never. Indeed, unless when a chance influx of visitors at Gateshead Hall rendered it necessary to turn to account all the accommodations it contained. Yet, it was one of the largest and stateliest chambers in the mansion. A bed, supported on massive pillars of mahogany, hung with curtains of deep red damask, stood out like a tabernacle in the center. The two large windows, with their blinds away drawn down, were half shrouded in and folds of similar drapery. The carpet was red. The table at the foot of the bed was covered with a crimson cloth. The walls were a soft fawn color with a blush of pink in it. The wardrobe, the toilet table, the chairs were of darkly polished old mahogany. Out of these deep surroundings, shades rose high and glared white. The piled up mattresses and pillows of the same bed, spread with a snowy Marseillais counterpane. Scarcely less prominent was an ample cushioned easy chair near the head of the bed, also white with a footstool before it, and looking, as I thought, like a pale throne. This room was chill because it seldom had a fire. It was silent because remote from the nursery and kitchen. Solemn because it was known to be so seldom entered. The housemaid alone came here on Saturdays to wipe from the mirrors and the furniture a week's quiet dust. And Mrs. Reed herself, at far intervals, visited it to review the contents of a certain secret drawer in the wardrobe. where were stored divers' parchments, her jewel casket, and a miniature of her deceased husband. And in those last words lies the secret of the Red Room. The spell which kept it so lonely in spite of its grandeur. Mr. Reid had been dead 9 years. It was in this chamber he breathed his last. Here he lay in state, hence his coffin was borne by the undertaker's men. And since that day, a sense of dreary consecration had guarded it from frequent intrusion. My seat, to which Bessie and the bitter Miss Abbott had left me riveted, was a low ottoman near the marble chimney piece. The bed rose before me to my right hand. There was the high, dark wardrobe with subdued, broken reflections bearing the gloss of its panels. To my left were the muffled windows, a great looking glass between them repeated the vacant majesty of the bed and room. I was not quite sure whether they had locked the door, and when I dared move, I got up and went to see. Alas, yes, no jail was ever more secure. Returning, I had to cross before the looking glass. My fascinated glance involuntarily explored the depth it revealed. All looked colder and darker in that visionary hollow than in reality. And the strange little figure there gazing at me with a white face and arms picking the gloom and glittering eyes of fear moving where all else was still had the effect of a real spirit. I thought it like one of the tiny phantoms, half fairy, half imp. Bassie's evening stories represented as coming out of lone, ferny dells in moors and appearing before the eyes of belated travelers. I returned to my stool.
By this time in novel, Jane has learned about her family background, after which she realizes that poverty is not acceptable to her, though she is willing to improve her position in the society with the help of education. As a result of which, when Mr. Lloyd recommends sending Jane to school, she imagines school to be an inspiring place where she will learn to sing, paint, and speak French. Is Jane able to experience any good changes? Let's find out in the excerpts of chapter 4. November, December, and half of January passed away. Christmas and the New Year had been celebrated at Gateshead with the usual festive cheer. Presents had been interchanged, dinners and evening parties given. From every enjoyment, I was, of course, excluded. My share of gaiety consisted in witnessing the daily appareling of Eliza and Georgiana and seeing them descending to the drawing room dressed out in thin muslin frocks and scarlet sachets, with hair elaborately ringleted, and afterwards in listening to the sound of the piano or the harp played below, to the passing to and fro of the butler and footmen, to the jingling of glass and china as refreshments were handed, to the broken hum of conversation as the drawing room door opened and closed. Post discussion with Mr. Lloyd about school, Jane was optimistic about her situation. But the only change that she sees is the increased distance between Jane and Reed children. She can see all the celebrations of Christmas and New Year have been done without her presence. It is only after 3 months that she has been summoned downstairs for breakfast. That too because Mr. Brocklehurst has come to meet her. Do you say your prayers night and morning? Continued my interrogator. Yes, sir. Do you read your Bible? Sometimes. With pleasure. Are you fond of it? I like Revelations and the book of Daniel and the Genesis and Samuel and a little bit of Exodus and some parts of Kings and Chronicles and Jacob and Jonah. And the Psalms? I hope you like them. No, sir. No? Oh, shocking. I have a little boy younger than you who knows 6 Psalms by heart, And when you ask him which he would rather have, a gingerbread nut to eat or a verse of Zam to learn, he says, "Oh, the verse of a Zam, angel sing Zams," says he. "I wish to be little angel here below." He then gets 2 nuts in recompense for his infant piety. "Zams are not interesting," I remarked. "That proves you have a wicked heart, and you must pray to God to change it, to give you a new and clean one, to take away your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh." Mr. Brocklehurst is questioning Jane about the notions of hell, heaven, and sin. But when Jane confesses that she does not find the Zams interesting, Mr. Brocklehurst too is convinced that Jane's moral character is not up to the mark. He says she needs to be sent to Lowood School immediately. "Mr. Brocklehurst, I believe I intimated you in the letter which I wrote to you 3 weeks ago that this little girl is not quite the character and disposition I could wish. Should you admit her into Lowood School, I should be glad if the superintendent and teachers were requested to keep a strict eye on her, and, above all, to guard against her worst fault, a tendency to deceit." After Jane says that she does not find Zams interesting, Mrs. Reed is feeling triumphed to have understood Jane properly. Not only she wants Jane to be sent to Lowood School, but also wants the teachers and superintendent to be strict with her. "I am not deceitful. If I were, I should say I loved you, but I declare I do not love you. I dislike you the worst of anybody in the world except John Reed. And this book about the liar you may give to your girl, Georgiana, for it is she who tells lies and not I." Jane is certainly not happy with being framed as deceitful and liar, so she feels that she needs at least to place her argument in her defense. When Mr. Brocklehurst leaves, Jane feels a rush of thoughts in her mind, and she says to Mrs. Reed that she is not deceitful. Had she been one, she should have said a lie that she loves Mrs. Reed. If she should call anyone a liar, it is Georgiana, her own daughter, and not Jane. After her outburst at Mrs. Reed, Jane declares herself as the winner of the field.
Jane has reached Lowood School, and here she is punished harshly and scolded by Mr. Lowood. Her initial experiences are depicted in a very excellent manner. "My first quarter at Lowood seemed an age, and not the golden age either. It comprised an irksome struggle with difficulties in habituating myself to the new rules and unwanted tasks. The fear of failure in these points harassed me worse than the physical hardship of my lot, though these were no trifles. During January, February, and part of March, the deep snows and after the melting, the almost impassable roads prevented our stirring beyond the garden walls except to go to church. But within these limits, we had to pass an hour every day in the open air. Our clothing was insufficient to protect us from the severe cold. We had no boots. The snow got into our shoes and melted there. Our ungloved hands became numbed and covered with chilblains as were our feet. I remember well the distracting irritation I endured from this cause every evening when my feet inflamed, and the torture of thrusting the swelled, raw, and stiff toes into my shoes in the morning. Hitherto, while gathering up the discourse of Mr. Brocklehurst and Miss Temple, I had not, at the same time, neglected precautions to secure my personal safety, which I thought would be effected if I could only elude observation. To this end, I had sat well back on the form, and while seeming to be busy with my sum, had held my slate in such a manner as to conceal my face. I might have escaped notice had not my treacherous slate somehow happened to slip from my hand, and falling with an obtrusive crash, directly drawn every eye upon me. I knew it was all over now, and as I falling with an obtrusive crash, directly drawn everyone eye upon me. I knew it was all over now, and as I stopped
to pick up the two fragments of slate, I rallied my forces for the worst I came. A careless girl, said Mr. Brocklehurst, and immediately after, it is the new pupil, I perceive. And before I could draw breath, I must not forget I have a word to say respecting her. Then aloud, how loud it seemed to me, let the child who broke her slate come forward. Of my own accord, I could not have stirred. I was paralyzed, but the two great girls who sit on each side of me set me on my legs and pushed me towards the dread judge. And then Miss Temple gently assisted me to his very feet, and I caught her whispered counsel. Don't be afraid, Jane. I saw it was an accident. You shall not be punished. The kind whisper went to my heart like a dagger. Another minute, she'll despise me for my hypocrisy. Though I, and an impulse of fury against Reed, Brocklehurst and Co., bounded in my pulses at the conviction. Fetch that stool, said Mr. Brocklehurst, pointing to a very high one from which a monitor had just risen. It was brought, placed the child upon, and I was placed there, by whom I don't know. I was only aware that they had hoisted me up to the height of Mr. Brocklehurst's nose, that he was within a yard of me, and that a spread of short orange and purple silk pelisses and a cloud of silvery plumage extended and waved below me. Mr. Brocklehurst hemmed. Ladies, said he, turning to his family, Miss Temple, teachers, and children, you all see this girl? Of course they did, for I felt their eyes directed like burning glasses against my scorched skin. You see, she's yet young. You observe she possesses the ordinary form of childhood. God has graciously given her the shape that He has given to all of us. No signal deformity points her out as a marked character. Who would think that evil one had already found a servant and agent in her? Yet such, I grieve to say, is a case. Let her stand half an hour longer on that stool, and let no one speak to her during the remainder of the day.
Jane befriended Helen Burns in the Lowood school, who serves as a foil to Mr. Brocklehurst as well as to Jane. Helen represents a mode of Christianity that stresses tolerance and acceptance. Helen ascetically trusts her own faith and turns the other cheek to Lowood's harsh policies. In chapter 9, we come to know about the disease consumption being spread all over Lowood. Poor Helen also has been infected and is kept on the sick room, taken care by the nurses. One night, Jane sneaks in the sick room where Helen has been kept. That very night, Helen dies in the arms of Jane. Close by Miss Temple's bed, and half covered with its white curtains, there stood a little crib. I saw the outline of a form under the clothes, but the face was hid by the hangings. The nurse I had spoken to in the garden sat in an easy chair asleep. An unsnuffed candle burned dimly on the table. Miss Temple was not to be seen. I knew afterwards that she had been called to a delirious patient in the fever room. I advanced, then paused by the crib side. My hand was on the curtain, but I preferred speaking before I withdrew it. I still recoiled at the dread of seeing a corpse. Helen, I whispered softly, are you awake? She stirred herself, put back the curtain, and I saw her face, pale, wasted, but quite composed. She looked so little changed that my fear was instantly dissipated. Can it be you, Jane? She asked, in her own gentle voice. Oh, I thought, she's not going to die. They're mistaken. She could not speak, and look so calmly if she were. I got on to her crib and kissed her. Her forehead was cold, and her cheek both cold and thin, and so were her hand and wrist, but she smiled as of old. Why are you come here, Jane? It is past 11 o'clock. I heard it strike some minutes since. I came to see you, Helen. I heard you were very ill, and I could not sleep till I had spoken to you. You came to bid me goodbye then. You are just in time, probably. Are you going somewhere, Helen? Are you going home? Yes, to my long home, my last home. No, no, Helen, I stopped, distressed. While I tried to devour my tears, a fit of coughing seized Helen. It did not, however, wake the nurse. When it was over, she lay some minutes exhausted. Then she whispered, Jane, your little feet are bare. Lie down and cover yourself with my quilt. I did so. She put her arm over me, and I nestled close to her. After a long silence, she resumed, still whispering, I'm very happy, Jane, and when you hear that I am dead, you must be sure and not grieve. There is nothing to grieve about. We all must die one day, and the illness which is removing me is not painful. It is gentle and gradual. My mind is at rest. I have no one to regret me much. I have only a father, and he is lately married, and will not miss me. By dying young, I shall escape great sufferings. I had not qualities or talents to make my way very well in the world. I should have been continually at fault. But where are you going to, Helen? Can you see? Do you know? I believe. I have faith. I'm going to God. Where is God? What is God? My Maker and yours, who will never destroy what He created. I rely implicitly on His power and confide wholly in His goodness. I count the hours till the eventful one arrives, which shall restore me to Him, reveal Him to me. You are sure then, Helen, that there is such a place as heaven, and that our souls can get to it when we die? I am sure there is a future state. I believe God is good. I can resign my immortal part to Him without any misgiving. God is my Father. God is my friend. I love Him. I believe He loves me. And shall I see you again, Helen, when I die? You will come to the same region of happiness, be received by the same mighty, universal parent, no doubt, dear Jane. Again I questioned, but this time only in thought. Where is that region? Does it exist? And I clasped my arms closer round Helen. She seemed dearer to me than ever. I felt as if I could not let her go. I lay with her face hidden on her neck. Presently she said in the sweetest tone, How comfortable I am. That last fit of coughing had tired me a little. I feel as if I could sleep. But don't leave me, Jane. I like to have you near me. I'll stay with you, dear Helen. No one shall take me away. Are you warm, darling? Yes. Good night, Jane. Good night, Helen. She kissed me, and I her, and we both soon slumbered. When I awoke, it was day. An unusual movement roused me. I looked up. I was in somebody's arms. The nurse held me. She was carrying me through the passage back to the dormitory. I was not reprimanded for leaving my bed. People had something else to think about. No explanation was afforded then to me my many questions. But a day or two afterwards, I learned that Miss Temple, on returning to her own room at dawn, had found me laid in the little crib, my face against Helen Burns' shoulder, my arms round her neck. I was asleep, and Helen was dead. Her grave is in Brocklehurst churchyard. For 15 years after her death, it was only covered by a grassy mound, but now a grey marble tablet marks the spot, inscribed with her name and the word Resurgam.
By this time, Jane arrived at Thornfield Hall from Millcote. Here, Jane learns that she will be tutoring Adele, an 8-year-old French girl. Mrs. Fairfax, the housekeeper, briefly describes about Mr. Rochester and Grace to Jane. Now we move to chapter 12, the promise of a smooth career, which my first calm introduction to Thornfield Hall seemed to pledge, was not belied on a longer acquaintance with the place and its inmates. Mrs. Fairfax turned out to be what she appeared, a placid-tempered, kind-natured woman of competent education and average intelligence. My pupil was a lively child, who had been spoilt and indulged, and therefore was sometimes wayward. But as she was committed entirely to my care, and no injudicious interference from any quarter ever thwarted my plans for her improvement, she soon forgot her little freaks and became obedient and teachable. She had no great talents, no marked traits of character, no peculiar development of feeling or taste which raised her 1 inch above the ordinary level of childhood, but neither had she any deficiency or vice which sunk her below it. She made reasonable progress entertained for me a vivacious, though perhaps not very profound affection, and by her simplicity, gay prattle, and efforts to please, inspired me, in return, with a degree of attachment sufficient to make us both content in each other's society. This parenthesis will be brought cool language by persons who entertain Solomon doctrines about the Anglican nature of children and the duty of those charged with their education to conceive for them an idolatrous devotion. But I am not writing to flatter parental egotism, to echo Kant, or prop up humbug. I am merely telling the truth. I felt a conscientious solicitude for Adele's welfare and progress, and a quiet liking for her little self, just as I cherished toward Mrs. Fairfax a thankfulness for her kindness and a pleasure in her society, proportionate to the tranquil regard she had for me, and the moderation of her mind and character.
By now, Jane was in Miss Rochester's house. She has fallen for him, and even he has fallen. But Mr. Rochester, the guardian of Adele, was already going to be married. But still, he tries to convince Jane to get him married. Then, Jane, you must play the cane bend. Very well, sir, I will try. I did try, but was presently swept off the stool and denominated a little bungler, being pushed unceremoniously to one side, which was precisely what I wished. He unspurred my place and proceeded to accompany himself, for he could play as well as sing. I hate me to the window recess. And while I sat there and looked out on the still trees and dim lawn to a sweet air was sung in mellow tones the following strain. The truest love that ever heart felt at its kindled core did through each vein in quickened start the tide of being poured. Her coming was my hope each day, her parting was my pain. The chance that did her steps delay was ice in every vein. I dreamed it would be nameless bliss as I loved to be. And to this object did I press as blindly as eagerly. But wide as pathless was the space that lay our lives between, and dangerous as a foamy race of ocean surges green, and haunted as a robber path through wilderness or wood. For might and right and woe and wrath between our spirits stood. I dangerous dared, I hindrance scorned, I ermines did defy. Whatever Menac harassed, warned, I passed impetuous by. On sped my rainbow past us light. I flew as in a dream.
In chapter 14, Jane sees little of Rochester during his first days of Thornfield. One night, however, in his after dinner mood, Rochester sends for Jane and Adele. He gives Adele the present she has been anxiously awaiting, and while Adele plays, Rochester is uncharacteristically chatty with Jane. During this interval, even Adele was seldom sent for to his presence, and all my acquaintance with him was confined to an occasional rencounter in the hall, on the stairs, or in the gallery, when he would sometimes pass me haughtily and coldly, just acknowledging my presence by a distant nod or a cool glance, and sometimes bow and smile with gentlemanlike affability. His changes of mood did not offend me because I saw that I had nothing to do with their alternation. The ebb and flow depended on causes quite disconnected with me. One day he had company to dinner and had sent for my portfolio in order, doubtless, to exhibit its contents. The gentleman went away early to attend a public meeting at Millcote, as Mrs. Fairfax informed me, but the night being wet and inclement, Mr. Rochester did not accompany them. Soon after they were gone, he rang the bell. A message came that I and Adele were to go downstairs. I brushed Adele's hair and made her neat, and having ascertained that I was myself in my usual Quaker trim, where there was nothing to retouch, all being too close and plain, braided locks included, to admit of disarrangement. We descended, Adele wondering whether the petit coffre was at length come, for, owing to some mistake, its arrival had hitherto been delayed. She was gratified there it stood, a little cartoon, on the table when we entered the dining room. She appeared to know by instinct. Mabot, exclaimed she, running towards it. With this announcement, he rose from his chair and stood, leaning his arm on the marble mantelpiece. In that attitude, his shape was seen plainly as well as his face. His unusual breadth of chest, disproportionate almost to his length of limb. I am sure most people would have thought him an ugly man, yet there was so much unconscious pride in his port, so much ease in his demeanor, such a look of complete indifference to his own external appearance, so haughty a reliance on the power of other qualities, intrinsic or adventitious, to atone for the lack of mere personal attractiveness, that in looking at him, one inevitably shared the indifference and, even in a blind, imperfect sense, put faith in the confidence. Miss Eyre, I beg your pardon. The fact is, once for all, I don't wish to treat you like an inferior, that is, correcting himself. I claim only such superiority as must result from 20 years difference in age and a century's advance in experience. This is legitimate etige- this is legitimate exigence, as Adele would say, and it is by virtue of this superiority and this alone that I desire you to have the goodness to talk to me a little now and divert my thoughts, which are galed with dwelling on one point, cankering as a rusty nail. Nature meant me to be, on the whole, a good man, Miss Eyre, one of the better kind, and you see, I am not so. You would say you don't see it. At least I flatter myself I read as much in your eye. Beware, by the by, what you express with the organ. I am quite, I am quick at interpreting its language. Then take my word for it. I am not a villain. You are not to suppose that, not to attribute to me any such bad eminence, but owing, I verily believe, rather to circumstances than to my natural bent. I am a trite, commonplace sinner, hackneyed in all the poor petty dissipations with which the rich and worthless try to put on life. I wish I had stood firm. God knows I do. Dread remorse when you are tempted to err, Miss Eyre, remorse in the poison of life. And better, so much better, as pure oris than foul dross. You seem to doubt me? I don't doubt myself. I know what my aim is, what my motives are, and at this moment I pass a law unalterable as that of the Medes and Persians that both are right.
Jane was thinking about Mr. Rochester at that night. When trying to sleep, Jane is disturbed by strange noises in the hallway, a demonic laugh at her door. Jane sees smoke coming from Rochester's bedroom. Jane saves Mr. Rochester from fire. After that, they are wandering together. Chapter 15. Jane saves Rochester from the fire. How, sir? He made no reply. But with his head. At the end of it, he required in rather a peculiar tone, I forget whether you said you saw anything when you opened your chamber door. No, sir, only the candlestick on the ground. But you heard an odd laugh? You have heard that laugh before, I should think, or something like it? Yes, sir, there is a woman who shoes here called Grace Poole. She laughs in that way. She is a singular as little noisra person. Just so, Grace Poole, you have guessed it. She is, as you say, singular, very. Well, I shall reflect on the subject. Meantime, I am glad that you are the only person beside myself acquainted with the precise detail of tonight's incident. You are not talking fool. Say nothing about it. I will account for this state of affairs. And now return to your own room. I shall do very well on the sofa in the library for the rest of the night. It is near 4. In 2 hours, the servant will be up. Good night, then, sir, said I, departing. He seemed surprised, very inconsistently so, as he said, just told me to go. What? He exclaimed. Are you quitting me already? And not, in short, in that our mutual strangers at being would have been tolerable to me in that way. You said I might go, sir, but not without taking leave, not without a word or two of acknowledgement and goodwill, brief, dry fashion. Why you saved my life, snatched me from a horrible and excruciating death, and you walk past me as if we wished to shake hands. He held out his hands. I gave him mine. He took it first in one, then in both his own. You have saved my life. I have a pleasure in owing you so immense a debt. I cannot say more. Nothing else that would have been more tolerable to me in the character of creditor for such an obligation. But you, it is different. I feel your benefits. No burden, Jan.
Chapter 16. This chapter reveals Jane's feelings for Rochester. However, Jane fantasizes about a former love affair between Grace and Rochester and wonders if Grace's originality and strength of character compensate for her lack of beauty. Jane believes Rochester isn't unduly impressed by women's appearances. For example, Jane isn't very attractive, but Rochester's words, glance, and voice the night before suggested that he liked her. However, there is a significant distinction between Jane and Grace. As Bessie Levin put it, Jane is a lady. Let's go to the excerpts. I both wished and feared to see Mr. Rochester on the day which followed this sleepless night. I wanted to hear his voice again, yet feared to meet his eye. During the early part of the morning, I momentarily expected his coming. He was not in the frequent habit of entering the schoolroom, but he did step in for a few minutes sometimes, and I had the impression that he was sure to visit it that day. But the morning passed just as usual. Nothing happened to interrupt the quiet course of Adele's studies. Only soon after breakfast, I heard some bustle in the neighborhood of Mr. Rochester's chamber, Mrs. Fairfax's voice and lace, and the cook's, that is, John's wife, and even John's own gruff tones. There were exclamations of, "What a mercy master was not burnt in his bed! It is always dangerous to keep a candle lit at night. How providential that he had presence of mind to think of the water. I wonder he waked nobody. It is to be hoped he will not take cold with sleeping on the library sofa, etc." There she sat, state and taciturn looking, as usual, in her brown stuff gown, her check apron with handkerchief and cap. She was intent on her work, in which her whole thoughts seemed absorbed. On her hard forehead and in her commonplace feature was nothing either of the paleness or desperation one would have expected to see marking the countenance of a woman who had attempted murder and whose intended victim had followed her last night to her lair and, as I believed, changed her with the crime she wished to perpetrate. I was amazed, confounded. She looked up while I still gazed at her. No start, no increase or failure of color betrayed emotion, consciousness of guilt, or fear of detection. See, she said, "Good morning, miss," in her usual phlegmatic and brief manner, and taking up another ring and more tape, went on without her sewing. "I will put her to some task," thought I. Such absolute impenetrability is past comprehension.
Chapter 23. Where Jane and Mr. Rochester came too close to each other and deeply in love. They tried to hide the feelings, but the love, the feelings, emotions can't handle by them. Firstly, Mr. Rochester expresses his feelings, and at the end, Jane also accepts his proposal of marriage. But she was sad by knowing he is going to marry Miss Ingram. Following lines shows how independent, strong, clear nature of Jane Eyre. Mr. Rochester said, "I sometimes have a queer feeling with regard to you, especially when you are near me, as now it is as if I had a sting somewhere under my left ribs, tightly and inextricably knotted to a similar sting situated in the corresponding quarter of your little frame. And if that boisterous channel and 200 miles or so of land come broad between us, I'm afraid that cord of communion will be snapped, and then I have a nervous notion I should take to bleeding inwardly. As for you, you had forget me. That I never should, sir, you know. The mode of emotion stirred by grief and love within me was claiming mastery and struggling for full sway, and asserting a right to predominate, to overcome, to live, rise and reign at last. Yes, and to speak. I grieve to leave Thornfield. I love Thornfield. I love it because I have lived in it a full and delightful life, our minds and excluded from every glimpse of communion with what is bright and energetic and high. I have talked face to face with what I reverence, with what I delight in, with an original, a vigorous and a expanded mind. I have known you, Mr. Rochester, and it strikes me with terror and anguish to feel I absolutely must be torn from you forever. I see the necessity of departure, and it is like looking on the necessity of death. Where do you see the necessity? He asked suddenly. Where? You, sir, have placed it before me. In what shape? In the shape of Miss Ingram, a noble and beautiful woman, your bride. My bride? What bride? I have no bride. But you will have. Yes, I will. I will. He set his teeth. Then I must go. You have said it yourself. No, you must stay. I swear it, and the oath shall be kept. I tell you, I must go. I retorted, roused to something like passion. Do you think I can stay to become nothing to you? Do you think I am an automaton, a machine without feelings? And can bear to have my morsel of bread snatched from my lips and my drop of living water dashed from my cup? Do you think? Because I'm poor, obscure, plain, unliteral. I'm soulless and heartless? You think wrong. I have as much soul as you and full as much heart. And if God had gifted me with some beauty and much wealth, I should have made it as hard for you to leave me as it is now for me to leave you. I'm not talking to you now through the medium of custom, conventionalities, nor even for mortal flesh. It is my spirit that addresses your spirit, just as if both had passed through the grave and we stood at God's feet equal, as we are. As we are, repeated Mr. Rochester. So, he added, enclosing me in his arms, gathering me to his breast, pressing his lips on my lips. So, Jane. Yes, so, sir, I rejoined. And yet not so, for you are a married man, or as good as a married man, and wed to one inferior to you, to one with whom you have no sympathy, whom I do not believe you truly love, for I have seen and heard you sneer at her. I would scorn such a union, therefore I am better than you. Let me go, let me go. Where, Jane? To Ireland? Yes, to Ireland. I have spoken my mind and can go anywhere now. Jane, be still. Don't struggle so, like a wild, frantic bird that is rending its own plumage in its desperation. I am no bird, and no need ensnares me. I am a free human being with an independent will, which I now exert to leave you. Another effort set me at liberty, and I stood erect before him. And your will shall decide your destiny, he said. I offer you my hand, my heart, and a share of my all possessions. You play a farce which I merely laugh at. I ask you to pass through life at my side, to be my second self and best earthly companion. For that fate you have already made your choice and must abide by it. Jane, be still a few moments. You are overexcited I will be still too. A raft of wind came sweeping down the laurel walk and trembled through the bough of the chestnut. It wandered away to an indefinite distance. It died. The nightingale's song was the only voice of the hour. In listening to it, I again wept. Mr. Rochester sat quiet, looking at me gently and seriously. Some time passed before he spoke. He at last said, "Come to my side, Jane, and let us explain and understand one another. I will never again come to your side. I'm torn away now and cannot return. But Jane, I summon you as my wife. It is you only I intend to marry." I was silent. I thought he mocked me. "Come, Jane, come hither. Your bride stands between us." He rose and with a stride reached me. "My bride is here," he said, again drawing me to him, "because my equal is here and my likeness, Jane. Will you marry me?" Still, I did not answer, and still I writhed myself from his grasp, for I was still incredulous.
Now Jane is married to Mr. Rochester, and she is going to inform us about her present time. This is the last chapter of the novel, and the lines are, "Reader, I married him. A quiet wedding we had, he and I. The parson and the clerk were alone present. When we got back from church, I went into the kitchen of the manor house, where Mary was cooking the dinner and John cleaning the knives. And I said, 'Mary, I have been married to Mr. Rochester this morning.' The housekeeper and her husband were both of that decent phlegmatic order of people to whom one may at any time safely communicate a remarkable piece of news, without incurring the danger of having one's ears pierced by some shrill ejaculation, and subsequently stunned by a torrent of wordy wonderment. Mary did look up, and she did stare at me. The ladle with which she was basting a pair of chickens roasting at the fire did for some 3 minutes hang suspended in air, and for the same space of time, John's knives also had rest from polishing process. But Mary, bending again over the roast, said only, "Have you, miss? Well, for sure." A short time after she pursued, "I see you go out with the master, but I didn't know you were gone to church to be wed." And she busted away. John, when I turned to him, was grinning from ear to ear. "I told Mary how it would be," he said. "I knew what Mr. Edward." John was an old servant and had known his master when he was the cadet of the house. Therefore, he often gave him his Christian name. "I knew what Mr. Edward would do, and I was certain he would not wait long neither. And he has done right, for aught I know. I wish you joy, miss." And he politely pulled his forelock. "Thank you, John. Mr. Rochester told me to give you and Mary this." I put into his hand a £5 note. Without waiting to hear more, I left the kitchen and passing the door of that scantum some time after I caught the words, "She'll happen to do better for him, nor any two grand ladies." And again, if she bent one of those handsomest, she's none fall and very good natured, and I have seen she's fair beautiful. Anybody may see that. I wrote to Moor House and to Cambridge immediately to say what I had done, fully explaining also why I had thus acted. Diana and Mary approved the step unreservedly. Diana announced that she would just give me time to get over the honeymoon and then she would come and see me. Now Jane is informing us about the present time and about people around her, how they are doing in their lives. My Edward and I then are happy. And the most so because those we love the most are happy likewise. Diana and Mary River are both married. Alternately, once every year they come to see us and we go to see them. Diana's husband is a captain in a navy, a gallant officer and a good man. Mary's is a clergyman, a college friend of her brother's, and from his attainments and principles, worthy of the connection. Both Captain Fitzjames and Mr. Walton love their wives and are loved by them. As to St. John Rivers, he left England. He went to India. He entered on the path he had marked for himself. He pursues it still. A more resolute, indefatigable pioneer never wrought amidst rock and dangers. Firm, faithful, and devoted, full of energy and zeal and truth, he labors for his race. He clears their painful way to improvement. He hews down like a giant the prejudices of creed and caste that encumber it. He may be stern, he may be exacting, he may be ambitious yet, but his is the sternness of the warrior great heart, who guards his pilgrim convoy from onslaught of Apollyon. His is the exertion of the apostle, who speaks but for Christ, when he says, "Whosoever will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me." His is the ambition of high master spirit, which aims to fill a place in the first rank of those who are redeemed from the earth, who stand without fault before the throne of God, who share the last mighty victories of the Lamb, who are called and chosen and faithful. Saint John is unmarried. He will never marry now. Himself has hitherto sufficed to the toil, and the toil draws near its close. His glorious sun hastens to its setting. The last letter I received from him drew from my eyes human tears, and yet filled my heart with divine joy. He anticipated his sure reward, his incorruptible crown. I know that a stranger's hand will write to me next, to say that the good and faithful servant has been called at length into the joy of his Lord. And why weep for this? No fear of death will darken St. John's last hour. His mind will be unclouded. His heart will be undaunted. His hope will be sure. His faith steadfast. His own words are a pledge of this. My master, he says, has forewarned me. Daily he announces more distinctly. Surely I come quick, and hourly I more eagerly respond. Amen. Even so come, Lord Jesus.
So that brings us to the end of today's session. I would like to conclude with a big thanks to our revered teacher, Dr. Kalyani ma'am, for this wonderful platform, to all our readers for their amazing performance, and above all, our YouTube viewers for their love and support. Do watch all the previous videos. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and also comment if you have any suggestions. Let me also remind that those who are interested to participate in the readathon on 24th, do leave us a message below and we'll get back to you. Thank you, one and all. See you next Sunday. Bye bye.